Yeah, and so the net result over time was we had a financialization of our economy. And so
Right.
we stopped making real things. We started financializing things. So we're providing financial services, becoming the financial hub of the world more and more. We also have, of course, had a very big healthcare industry, big military industrial complex. And then, one of the benefits of it, we did have a pretty strong technical sector, which most people know. A lot of that was centered around software, right? Because that doesn't really rely on making things, as well as engineering designs that we would then, have people make that in other countries. And so basically anything that's really high margin, we're able to do. But anything that involves physically making things is where we're increasingly weak at. And so this lasted for several decades. It's there's trade-offs there. And so we've seen some areas, for example, like the Rust Belt, that the Midwest,
Right.
that's really suffered because that's where a lot of our manufacturing base was. Whereas you've seen, for example, the coasts flourish because that's where a lot of the financialization is, or the software or the healthcare. And so we basically hollowed out the center of our country, hollowed out kind of the blue collar sort of work, and really doubled down on the coasts, on the white collar work, and things like that.
So what does that do to wages over the
Well,
long?
yeah, definitely, it deeply suppresses wages because in addition to hiring fewer, domestic manufacturing workers, the ones that remain have a lot more foreign competition because they're always at risk of having their plant outsourced to Mexico or China, wherever the case may be, and so that puts a lot of downward pressure on wages, especially for again people that work in skilled manufacturing or routine tasks and or even rather technical, because for example, if you look at some of the high-end manufacturing areas like Japan or Germany, right? A lot of that is advanced technicians. And the United States is even outsourcing a lot of those types of people just because we're not making the physical goods here nearly to the extent that we used to, or compared to many of our kind of advanced industrial peers.
Yeah, and it seems to me what has happened is we've turned into an economy that really revolves around financialization, to your point, but also just domestic services. Like
Exactly.
you go around the block and look at what all the businesses are. And I did a video the other day. We talked about Uber, we talked about DoorDash or Topgolf, or restaurants, bars, cafes, accountants, lawyers. It's like 90% of the businesses you see revolve around just selling domestic services to one another. And if you really think about it, you're like, okay, well, where's all the stuff coming from? It's
Yep.
like
Mostly
it's
mostly
not coming
China.
from here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then one more thing I'd like you to touch on. It's fascinating. I was actually listening to a Jordan Peterson video the other day, believe it or not, one of his classroom lectures. And he started talking a little bit about macro. And you can tell that he's read some books on it. I know he's not an expert, but you can definitely tell he's read some books. And he started talking about the demographic shift, or more women coming into the workforce during this exact same period in the 1970s, and how you basically doubled the competition for jobs. And that might have had an impact on suppressing real wages as well. Do you think that was a factor, or do you think it was really more about the petrodollar system and outsourcing these jobs to foreign countries?
I think it's one of those things where there's always multiple variables. One thing is if you look at most other developed countries, they had a similar demographic shift, right?
Yeah,
Because we had more women coming into the workforce. But for example, those countries almost exclusively have less wealth concentration than the United States.
mm,
So their overall middle class generally has a better standard of living in some ways compared to U.S. middle class, even though our say top 10% are far wealthier than their top 10% on average. And so a lot of this was based on specific policies that the United States did.
right.
Although of course there's always multiple factors involved, and there is more competition for jobs now, both internationally, and it's actually if you look at it's interesting if you look at Japan. Japan has been slower than most other countries to bring women into the workforce, but that's actually they've increasingly turned towards that because of most people know they have a shrinking population now, so they have some of the most aged and slowest growing demographics in the world, and one way that they handled that over the past decade or so is that they've seen a sharp rise in women in the workforce, and
Right.
it's actually kind of crazy because even though their country's 10 years older on average, like their median age is 10 years older than the United States, in 2020 they actually have a higher labor participation rate than the United States.